Now, and the first citizens' jury into the nuclear fuel cycle took the first steps today that may lead to the storing of high-level nuclear waste in South Australia. Our reporter Simon Royal joins us now live from the SAMRI building on North Terrace. Simon, the jury wrapped up proceedings a few hours ago, and it would seem even there the British exit was a hot topic of discussion.
Indeed it was, Emma. Brexit was quite a strong theme here today, and I'll explain more about that a little later on. But 50 South Australians, randomly chosen, all sorts of ages, all sorts of backgrounds, came here to this futuristic-looking building to discuss our state's future.
Should a down-in-the-dumps economy earn money from other people's nuclear waste? These people have already decided it'd be a no.
Why? Because we don't want this dump here. Quite simple, really.
For the rest of us, whether it's yes, no or maybe, these are some of the people here to help.
It's a really exciting opportunity. It's great that they're engaging us in this kind of way, and I hope that it's helpful to the rest of the population.
Earlier this year, the Nuclear Fuel Cycle Royal Commission delivered its findings. Nuclear power in Australia doesn't make economic sense, nor is there much scope in enriching uranium here either, though mining should be expanded if demand dictates. But a decades-long multi-billion-dollar project to store high-level nuclear waste could earn even more billions.
Onkelos must last 100,000 years.
But only the most committed or tragic will ever read the full document, so untangling it, giving the public something useful, is the jury's job.
Well, we do know that people get their information about the nuclear fuel cycle through The Simpsons, so we'd ask them to take a slightly deeper step into the nuclear fuel cycle and understand.
The Cookita people understand, with the state's existing nuclear involvement on or near their traditional lands.
Being a traditional owner brings a unique experience, both historically and contemporary, about dealing with these types of issues, and that's an experience that I hope to bring to this jury.
The jury finishes later this year, indicating a broad community view, yes, no or maybe, but the final decision rests with government.
But whether we take that next step has not yet been determined.
In this disengaged age, do many people believe that? Citizens' juries were started in the US in the 70s by the Jefferson Centre. Its CEO was in Adelaide today, not to manufacture consent, he says, but engagement. He pointed to the Brexit bombshell as an example of out-of-touch government.
Up until this point, it didn't matter, people feeling like it didn't matter what they did. For the last decade, nothing changed. There was only one way to make their voice heard, and that was to do something completely drastic.
My future, my children, my grandchildren, my great...
Voters doing drastic things, something no government likes.
So Jay Weatherill made the point today that Brexit was a rolled gold example, to use his words, of an out-of-touch cultural and political elite. But Ian Walker from the New Democracy Foundation, how does listening to a citizens' jury make a government less out of touch and less elite than, say, listening to protesters?
It's really about not just listening to the most passionate voices. Much like a criminal jury wouldn't have just the defendant's family and the victim's family, we take a random selection to get people from all walks of life. So it's about hearing from everyone.
Is there a foregone conclusion? Because some jurors think there might be.
I think some jurors, just like the general public, started out cynical. The only way to tell is for you to ask them at the end of 30, 40 hours in the room of doing this. I think even after one day they've got a sense the power's entirely in them.
So government's not going to get the answer it wants, whatever the answer is?
It's very hard to tell 50 people what to think. You might be able to do it for an hour or two, giving them 30 hours across 4 days in person. They're going to be masters of their own destiny.
What they're being asked to consider is so big, so potentially divisive, and so forever, if I can put it that way. How do you measure consent?
Consent, it's a lot like an elephant. You'll know it when it's standing in front of you. We look at these things where if we take people from all walks of life, young, old, all sorts of jobs, all across South Australia, and hear their view, you're going to hear the tone and tenor of what they care about. That's where consent is going to come from, if indeed it comes.
So 52-48 isn't consent, to use the Brexit example, that's division.
Referenda are terrible measures for achieving public trust. What we prefer to find is, if instead of asking a yes-no question, you can give people enough time to find common ground. Most citizens are capable of finding that common ground, and I think, in our experience, 90-95% of a room can find things they can agree on.
Ian Walker, thanks very much for your time.
Pleasure.
So the citizens' jury comes back here tomorrow and they'll hear a debate between some of the experts in this area, both economic and otherwise. In the meantime, Emma, to you.
Simon Royal reporting there. Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young. Two expert panels, including members from the business, scientific and conservation communities, have today weighed in on the debate to store high-level nuclear waste in South Australia. The first citizens' jury into the nuclear fuel cycle wrapped up proceedings for its second day a few hours ago. I spoke with one of the organisers, Emily Jenke, a little earlier and started by asking her what talking points provoked the most discussion for the 50 members of the jury.
So yeah, we did have two expert panels today. We had 8 speakers in all across Aboriginal issues, health, so radiation and health, ethics. We heard from business and industry people and also from the Conservation Council. So there was lots of dialogue around the difference of opinions. Probably one of the biggest talking points that the jury reflected on was the notion of trust. And we had 2 scientists in the room. We had Associate Professor Michael Penniman, who is a radiation oncologist at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and also Dr. Leanna Reid, South Australia's chief scientist. And the two of those speakers were really highly trusted by the jury.
The jury members are having to process rather large amounts of pretty complex information. How do you think that's been received, and is it prompting the sort of discussions that you'd like to see?
Yeah, definitely. They've really started to understand the complexity and the depth of their task. However, this jury is producing a brief for the community, which they are going to write, to help the community understand the issues and have some discussions and conversations about a range of topics. So their job, they've really got to try and stop themselves from going too deep into the material.
Day 2 has now concluded for the first citizens' jury. So what's next in the process?
So the next step is that the jury have called a number of witnesses. It's now our job to bring those witnesses into the jury on the 9th of July. And those witnesses go across a whole range of issues. Safety is a big one, environmental impacts, impacts on Aboriginal and regional communities, and there's also some other elements around global branding and how we're perceived by the rest of the world. So experts will come into the room, and the jury will try and get a real sense of the consequences of the advice that they're about to put forward to help the South Australian community talk about the issues themselves. We've got another 2 days, so by the end of day 4 the jury will write a report. So we'll write the report in the room and hand it to the Premier at 4 o'clock on the 10th of July.
Emily Jenke there. Police are investigating.
Good evening. Premier Jay Weatherill has been mobbed by angry protesters on day 1 of the nuclear citizens' jury in the city. Police forcibly moved one woman away from the Premier while others heckled and yelled abuse.
Police were on standby outside the SAMRI building and things got ugly when the Premier arrived. Anti-nuclear protesters didn't hold back and moved in on Jay Weatherill, triggering police into action. This woman was forced out of the way. The same woman pushed the boundaries and was handled by security officers when Royal Commissioner Kevin Scares delivered his findings to Governor Hugh Van Lay. Protesters make no apology for their actions today, urging anyone opposed to a nuclear dump to join their cause.
I don't see how people could not be emotional about something as serious as this. People are upset, they're frustrated, they're angry.
It's another pressure point for the Premier after he faced a week of intense scrutiny over failings by Families SA, but he appeared unfazed by today's events.
I think we've seen just an example of the strength of feelings that exist in this debate.
Deanna Williams, 7 News.
To other news now, and protesters have clashed with the Premier outside South Australia's first citizens' jury on the controversial nuclear waste dump idea. Jay Weatherill insists the jury's views will make a difference. A dump will only go ahead if it has community support.
The Premier arrived to debate the state's nuclear future, and he certainly got one.
We're the Bastille! Where's Bastille?
One protester repeatedly shoving a sign in Jay Weatherall's face, police pushing her away.
I think we've seen just an example of the strength of feelings that exist in this debate.
The atmosphere inside Samri more pleasant, the Premier addressing 50 randomly selected South Australians sitting on the first Citizens jury. Their task to help the state government decide whether SA should build a high-level nuclear waste dump following the Royal Commission's recommendation.
We're not asking the Citizens jury to say yes or no, we're asking them just to assist us to make the best possible decision.
Retired nurse Angela Faulkner among those raising questions they want the government to answer.
Often I think that things happen in our state and we don't know who's made the decisions.
Safety. That's my main concern because I have a family, a young family, so they'll be the future.
The jurors will meet 3 more times before producing their own report the government will use when it travels to around 70 regional towns over the next 3 months, with a priority on talking to Indigenous communities who oppose becoming home to a dump.
That is very much a part of the work that's going to go on now. How do we reach those communities? How do we ask them to put their perspectives?
A second jury of 350 people will then be used to sum up what the public thinks before the government makes its final decision by the end of the year.
Anyone that's even slightly opposed to it or has concerns about the industry to stand up now.
Tom Angley, 9 News.
Anti-nuclear protesters have mobbed the South Australian Premier as the state considers whether to build a nuclear waste dump. Demonstrators swarmed Jay Weatherall as he arrived at the first meeting of a citizens' jury to discuss the controversial proposal. A Royal Commission found a nuclear waste dump would deliver significant economic benefits, but many people have serious concerns about the environment and public safety. The Premier is hoping today's meeting will give people a better understanding.
Well, we do know that people get their information about the nuclear fuel cycle through The Simpsons, so we'd ask them to take a slightly deeper step into the nuclear fuel cycle and understand the matter.
The state government will make the ultimate decision.